not a place where people wear their faith on their sleeve. But my mother realized this is crazy. My mother realized this is insane that we're now saying that we want to kill children in America because it's the law of the land. She was offended by this. So she was one of the first officers in this first chapter, fledgling little chapter, which granted in the early 70s, nobody was really, lining up to thank you for doing things like that. They kind of felt maybe you were embarrassing them a little bit. Didn't want to talk about it too much. Don't talk about it out loud anyway. Talk about it in closed circles where you know everybody's of like mind. My mother, thank God, not a person who minds sharing her opinion. It's a good thing. I inherited some of that. It's all good. It's all coming out. It's not one being. My mother's father and all of her grandparents came through Ellis Island from Germany. And my mother's like 5'2", so stubborn little German people. Don't mess with them. A lot of Germans up here too, I'm telling you, it's a similar kind of a mindset. But I will say this in all seriousness, how fortunate I was to have been raised by a mother and a father who from the earliest days of my childhood, I understood that life mattered and life was worth defending. And even as a kid, now when you're a not small enough kid, you don't really care. As you become an older kid, you start to care what your friends think. You start to worry about whether you can be embarrassed by something. My entire life, if there was a parade and there was a Right to Life group, those Bevan kids were going to be marching in that parade whether they wanted to or not. Being at clinics and being on sidewalks and being vocal was something we were encouraged to do. Again, as I got older, I'm not a person who takes blindly anything. My faith, my positions on things. I'm an intellectually curious person. I read a lot. I do my own homework, but it goes back to what I said earlier. The more you do, so many in this room are familiar with the works of C.S. Lewis, for example. Many of you may have only read some of his works like the Chronicles of Narnia, but some of his other things that he's written, Mere Christianity and Grief Observed and any number of other things, these are brilliant. Mere Christianity, if you have never read Mere Christianity, M-E-R-E, Christianity, if you have never read that book, this was written as a compilation of radio conversations that he had because long before it became vogue in America, he had a radio show in England. And C.S. Lewis was a guy who was a die-hard atheist. Not just an agnostic, he was an atheist. Didn't believe in God. Didn't believe that there was anything to all this. Thought his enlightened mind and his brilliance could find a way to prove that none of this nonsense was needed, and etc., etc. But it was ironic that his great mind that he was blessed with at birth, because someone gave him that opportunity at life, and his desire to use that mind to disprove this thing that he thought others used in some way, shape, or form as a crutch, and his thorough, thoughtful analysis of this, and his conversations that he had as part of his radio program, as he ultimately came from being a skeptic and atheist to the exact opposite side of the equation because of logic and of the fact that he could not disprove the very things he set out to disprove, and in fact convinced himself very thoroughly of quite the opposite. And Mere Christianity is actually a book that compiles many of these things. It's a fantastic read. There was comment made earlier, again, by folks on this stage about the fact that there is evil in the world, and there is. If you want to read another great book by him, and I didn't really come here to talk about C.S. Lewis more books, but I'm on a roll, so I'm going to go. But it's the Screwtape Letters. If you've never, it's a tiny little book. It's brilliant. Talks about what it takes to get people to be distracted from the things that matter, that evil does exist. And for some people, maybe it's a real big evil. And for someone else, it may just be to sit behind someone at church and make fun of their clothing. Why would they wear that to church? But every one of us can be tempted and torn away from what matters by the smallest or largest of things. And as soon as we think we can't, we're losing. All these things I mentioned to you, because it matters how we're informed. And as I have grown and as I have read, I find myself more convinced than ever of these things that we speak of, in the fact that human life is what it is. And I'll share, perhaps in a moment if time allows, some of the same things as Congressman Massey did about just personal experiences with family. But I want to take you, for you young people especially, how many people in this room are in college at this time? It's a number of you. I mean, mostly on this side. You guys are either early or late or somewhere, maybe you've been there. But here's what I'll say. There's a number of college students in here, especially for you college students. I would say, you of all people, don't be ashamed or afraid to speak up. Because in a world where everybody's been led increasingly to the slaughter, and we're all told to keep our mouths shut, we're all acting like sheep and being encouraged to act like sheep. The world needs shepherds more than we've ever needed them. We really do. We need young people, young men and women, to stand up with conviction and to be bold on your college campus. If somebody could do me a huge favor, could someone just grab me a glass of water? That'd be awesome. Thank you. Otherwise, I'm going to have to pull a Marco Rubio on you, sneak off the stage, grab a little drink, and then come back. And that wouldn't be good. Love Marco Rubio. Don't mean to pick on. But here's what I would say. When I was in college, it was sophomore in college. I was taking a sociology class. And we were studying the Yanomamo Indians, which were this indigenous tribe in South America. And the whole backdrop of the story doesn't matter, but in the course of this, we were talking about certain beliefs that these people had as to their origins. Thank you so much. That's ice. Awesome. Thank you. And somebody in the class, I don't remember who it was, somebody said, that's kind of preposterous. I mean, this belief that they had, that involved, flying elephants and things that didn't even exist there. I mean, the whole thing just seems kind of odd. And so then the teacher then went into this very sarcastic comparison between that and Christianity. And it was meant to be insulting and pejorative. It really was. It wasn't even subtly that way. It was like, well, there's people who also believe that, a woman became pregnant and, immaculately, and then she has this baby, and then he's perfect. I mean, and he was just being, frankly, kind of a jerk, really. But he was doing it in a way that was meant to make clear to us that only a fool would think of these things. And someone enlightened like him with graduate level degrees and PhDs and someone instructing would not be so easily fooled. And all of us just sat there and listened to it. I was like 19 years old, maybe 20. But I was young. And I wasn't a kid that was ever a bold person in terms of speaking up. I really wasn't. I wasn't somebody who people would have thought, well, I bet Matt will say something. I was never shy per se, but I was much more so, actually, when I was younger. I was more reserved. At that point, I'm sure I was just trying to get a good grade and get out of there. But what's interesting is that if he had just said a couple of comments and stopped, it probably would have been fine, but he kept going, and people were uncomfortable. Myself and others, but I could tell people were just kind of uncomfortable. So finally, I just said, you know what, this is nonsense. And I raised my hand and I made a point, and I said, listen, what you're saying is insulting at many levels. And I disagree with you for the following reasons. And I don't remember exactly what I said, but he was unhappy with the fact that I was saying this. And so what do you suppose his very first reaction was? I mean, it was to mock me. It was to mock me and to insult me. And to try to ridicule me and try to make other kids laugh at me. And at first it kind of worked a little bit, but that's the wrong thing to do to a veteran. I will tell you that right now. It just is. If he'd known my mother, that wouldn't have worked. So I just was kind of like, oh, okay, right, fine, bring it then. So then it was kind of back and forth a little. So he made a point that was meant to make me be quiet and feel silly. And then I made a point back, and then he made a point that really made no sense. And then I made another point, and then he didn't want to talk about it anymore. But then I was just getting warmed up. But here's why I'm saying this. But again, I didn't want to make a big spectacle of it, but I said, look, this is the problem. I said, you can't defend what you just said. You're not willing to even have a conversation about it. And yet you were willing to say this and expect us to just take it, blanketly. I said, this is why I said something. But I'm telling you this, I would not have remembered this, because many things happen in people's lives, including apparently 36 years ago. That things happen. Not going to go there. But my point is, there's a lot of things that happen to us that we don't remember every little detail of. I remember this so clearly because of what happened afterwards. And this is for those of you in college what I want to press home to you. It wasn't that I said anything that clever or brilliant or what have you. There's nothing any different than any number of people in this room might have said the same thing. I don't even remember exactly what I said. What I do remember is that eventually he said, listen, why don't we just agree to just, move on? And so we did. But after that class, immediately after, and for up to 2 weeks afterwards on this campus, I bet 85% of the kids in that class came up to me and said, thank you for saying something. I wanted to say something, but I was afraid that if I did, he would make fun of me. And when he started to make fun of you, I was glad that I didn't say something. But here's the thing. I didn't care whether he made fun of me. I was irritated at the fact that the way he was approaching this. But the thing that I was struck by is that young people want to be led by bold people. They do, including their own peers. I wasn't trying to lead anybody. I wasn't trying to be bold. But what I was struck by is kids who I didn't even know and some who I did know were thanking me for having said something. I'm not even sure all these kids were people of faith, but they were offended by the way it was being sent down. So I say to you, young people, be that kind of bold. Be that kind of convicted. Who cares what people think of you? You will get to be my age and you'll realize, I can't believe I ever cared about the things I cared about. Now, in fairness, that's easy for people my age to say, and you've always heard it, and I heard it, and I didn't believe it either. You're not believing it right now, but I'm telling you it's true, whether you believe it or not. But here's the point. Here's the point. It is, at this point in your life, you do care more about what people think. But if you are bold in the things that matter, the things that drew you to be in this room, you will be a leader among men and women, the likes of which you find hard to believe. You will be a leader. And people will gravitate to you because the truth is the truth. The truth is the truth. It doesn't matter whether people believe it's the truth or not. It doesn't matter whether they recognize it's the truth or not. It doesn't matter whether they like that it's the truth or not. The truth is still the truth. And among those truths is the fact, and there's not a doctor in America, there's not a medical professional in America that can tell you otherwise. There is zero medical evidence whatsoever that a human life doesn't begin at conception. Not any. None. That's the truth. There is no doctor in America, they may be pro-abortion, but they cannot prove to you medically or scientifically that that is not a human life. They're just willing to disconnect the fact that it is a human life from their personal beliefs or their desire to make money or whatever the case might be. So I would encourage you, have that degree of boldness. Be willing to step up, be willing to take slings and arrows. When I first jumped into the political process a few years back, before I did, I had actually written a letter to someone in the faith-based community, somebody for whom this was their vocation and calling. And I wrote a letter and I said, where are the Daniels? Where are the Daniels? I had been looking what was happening. I'd never been involved in politics. I'd never run for anything. I'd never been somebody who did anything other than write checks and encourage people and voted. But I hadn't worked on campaigns. I'd never studied political science. I wasn't politically involved. But I began to look around as the father of, at that point, I don't know, I guess I had all nine of them at that point. And I looked at what's the future look like for these kids? Where is the future of America going? We're whistling silently through these catastrophes that are happening, pretending we don't hear or see. We are the watchmen on the walls, and we're not sounding the alarm, and we're just willing to just pretend things aren't happening, that there's not a degradation of the very values that this nation was built on. And I wrote this letter and I said, where are the Daniels? Where are the people that are willing to step up, that are willing to defy the king? If not literally, then figuratively, the modern day versions of the same thing. Who among us is willing to step up and say, nonsense already? This is not right, politically, spiritually, whatever the case might be. Where are the people from our ranks, the people that our founders intended to be the citizen legislators, the people who come from the ranks of the people, serve for finite periods of time and go back to wherever it is they came from? Where are those people that are willing to step up and do what our founders did, to pledge some modern day equivalent of their lives, fortunes, and sacred honors, and to really mean it? Where are these people? And the letter I got back was not as satisfying as I wish it had been. The specifics don't matter, other than to say that I realized there's not enough of them out there. And I will say this, there's not enough of them in the CEO, in the boardrooms, there's not enough of them in the pulpit, There's not enough of them in the classroom. There's not enough of them in our homes. There's not. There's not enough bold leadership, people who are unapologetic in the things that they know to be true. And I would encourage you, if nothing else, regardless of your age, to be a better, more convicted person with the things that you know to be fundamental truths in the matter than you've ever been even before you came into this room. Because if not now, when? What are you waiting for? What are you waiting for? I will say this, none of us knows the time that we have. We lost our oldest daughter when she was 17 years old. She went to school, she didn't come home. 17 years old, senior in high school, her life ahead of her, wanted to be a missionary, had everything possible waiting for her, and a heart that was aligned with all the things that would seemingly be rewarded at all the right levels for all the right reasons. Was killed in a car accident. None of us knows how much time we have. Not one of us. There's no guarantee that even on a beautiful sunny day that we on our way home make it home. I hope and pray every one of us does, but we may not. So what are we waiting for? If we're not convicted now, if we're not fighting now, if we're not bold now, when will we be? When will we be? And what will it take? What catalyst will be necessary? The one thing I would ask of you, though, is to be mindful of the exhortation that was given by, when, Paul is an apostle known to many, probably everyone in this room. Pretty wise individual with an amazing life history that informed that wisdom. And incidentally, I want to make one other digression. In a world where we have more information in this device in our pockets than Galileo had, Copernicus, Da Vinci, Newton, there wasn't one of those people that had even a fraction of the information at their disposal that we could pull up in 15 seconds on this device. But what we are lacking is wisdom. We don't have a lot of discernment and wisdom. We have a boatload of information. How do we process that information? And Paul, who was a man who had a